welcome to this deep dive of the history of the Beatles, one album at a time. This story isn't only about their music, it is about their personal relationships and especially the fashion. While talking about their music and them as a band, I want to break down how their fashion changed from young men born and raised in Liverpool to the biggest band and celebrities of the time, while breaking down the different phases of their careers and why their fashion and music changed during which times. So let's get into the band's history and how their sense of fashion became a hallmark for men all over the world. Before we get into the video, I quickly want to make an announcement. I have been hinting at my secret project since the beginning of the year and I can finally share it with you. I am starting a podcast. I am so excited to bring you this project. It is called Dolls, Unveiling the Legends of the 1960s and 70s, and my friend Abby and I will dive into the histories and legacies of the amazing women of the 1960s and 70s. If you want to learn more about it, make sure to stay to the end of the video. So without further ado, let's get into the Beatles' style and music evolution. This story starts in March of 1956 when a 16-year-old John Lennon and some of his school friends formed a skiffle band called the Quarrymen. After watching the band perform in July of that year, Paul McCartney joined them as their rhythm guitarist. He invited his friend George Harrison to watch the band play. George really wanted to be a part of the Quarrymen, but because he was only 14, John considered him too young and didn't want to talk about it. However, after several months of persistence, they finally let George audition, and on the spot he was enlisted as their lead guitarist. By January of 1959, John had begun studying at the Liverpool College of Art, and all his friends had left the band. The three guitarists, John, Paul, and George, were left. During that time, they were playing under the name of Johnny and the Moondogs, and they were playing rock and roll whenever they could find a drummer to accompany them. Stuart Sutcliffe eventually joined them as a guitarist after meeting John in art college. He suggested that the band name should be Beatles, as a tribute to Buddy Holly and the Crickets. They used that name until May of 1959, and they started to go by the Silver Beatles, and by August simply shortened it to the Beatles. During this time, their style was mostly the classic late 1950s style. They were wearing suits and occasionally a plaid shirt. They leaned into the 1950s teddy boy style. And when in August of 1960, their unofficial manager, Alan Williams, had booked them a residency in Hamburg, Germany, they had to audition for a drummer. They auditioned and hired Pete Best the same month. 6 days after hiring Pete, they left for Hamburg to play their 3.5-month residency. The Beatles played in Hamburg and several locations in the red light district. If you're interested in learning more about the Beatles' time in Hamburg, make sure to watch this video where I will give you a tour of Hamburg, showing you all the most important places, like where they lived and where they used to perform. Influenced by French and German youth they encountered during their time in Europe, the Fab Four adopted their iconic mop-top hairstyles, which have since become synonymous with the band. During their stint in Hamburg, they crossed paths with Astrid Kirchherr, whose role was pivotal in popularizing the style among them. Astrid would later recall, "All my friends in art school used to sport this Beatles haircut. And my then boyfriend, Klaus Voormann, had this hairstyle which Stuart admired greatly. He was the first to muster the courage to ditch the bridal cream and ask me to cut his hair." After Astrid had styled Stu's hair, she replicated the same look for George Harrison, after which John and Paul had built up the courage to follow them. As Stuart fell in love with Astrid, the band's fashion sense took a sharp turn towards leather, both on and off stage. Pete Best would later recall, "She walked in and she was dressed in leather. She was already stunning, but we were captivated. Leather? When Stu fell for her, he began donning leather too." Upon the Beatles' return to Liverpool, they brought along their leather-clad image, and soon many young men replicated the look. However, their leather days really didn't last long, and after much ridicule, they switched to suits, donning matching outfits as proposed by Brian Epstein, who had joined the band as a manager in 1961. He saw the potential in the Fab Four and was eager to make them stars. The smart businessman he was, he understood that their look and outfits played a great deal into their persona and chances of stardom. Taking cues from Black American vocal groups and British pop groups, the Beatles cultivated a cohesive image that established them as a recognizable band. Although the look was truly far from innovative, the band became known for their classic matching outfit, which possessed an effortlessly timeless appeal. Slimline blazers, slightly cropped trousers, and Chelsea boots defined the silhouette of their early days. appearing in matching outfits on the cover of their debut album Please Please Me in 1963. With raw energy and rock and roll influences from the likes of Buddy Holly and Little Richard, this album featured hit singles like Please Please Me and Love Me Do. During this period, none of the Beatles were seeing any women besides John Lennon. He was actually already married and about to have a child with Cynthia Powell, whom he met at art college. The rest of the band, as said, was still single, and they were on the cusp of Beatlemania. During their early years, the Beatles sported a uniform look that epitomized the clean-cut style of Beatlemania. They wore matching suits, skinny ties, and polished Chelsea boots. Their mop-top haircuts became iconic, representing the fresh, youthful energy of the 1960s. In late 1963, the foursome temporarily donned matching gray collarless suits, inspired by an earlier ensemble created by Pierre Cardin. The slim-fitting outfit featured pearl buttons and had no lapels, with each member sporting a thin black tie. Although this exact design is not common today, the band's dedication to wearing unique and smart designs truly encapsulated an era, providing endless inspiration for fashion designers in the decades to come. With the Beatles continued their rock and roll style, but with a more polished look, featuring hits like All My Loving and Roll Over Beethoven. Influenced by Motown and R&B albums, this solidified their status in the UK. After their breakthrough, they became more and more successful. During this time, Paul McCartney began dating actress Jane Asher, a relationship that truly brought him even more into the public eye. The cover of With the Beatles featured a striking black and white photograph of the band members in half-shadowed, moody portraits. They're all wearing black turtleneck and looking directly into the camera. The photo captured John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr staring intently at the camera, their faces partially obscured by the shadows. The Beatles' name prominently displayed in large bold letters at the top of the cover. Overall, the cover exudes a sense of mystery and coolness, reflecting the band's growing maturity and artistic evolution at the time of its release in 1963. I didn't want this video to be hours and hours long, so I kept some things out, but of course at one point Pete Best left the band and Ringo Starr came as the drummer and would be part of the Fab Four as we know and love them today. This doesn't belong at this part of the story. I just remembered that I probably forgot to tell you this, but I think you already know. Their third album, A Hard Day's Night, coincided with their first film of the same name. Due to their rising popularity, this movie was highly anticipated. The Beatles were world stars, known by millions, and the film was a great success. Not only at the box office, but it was also critically acclaimed and loved amongst critics. It even made it on the Times Magazine's list of the 100 best movies of all time. It featured all original compositions, showcasing hits like A Hard Day's Night and Can't Buy Me Love. The band's fame was now global. Paul's relationship with Jane Asher deepened, while John was balancing his skyrocketing career with family life. Their 1964 film, A Hard Day's Night, perfectly displays the band's incredible collection of suits, which has inspired generations of dressers. In the film, the musicians appear suave, yet retain their slightly boyish charm, as they run around with their blazers flapping in the wind. The Beatles continued their sharp uniform style with tailored suits, but with slight variations showing their individual style. The classic collarless jackets from Pierre Cardin and their consistent use of dark colors marked this period. The Beatles' style remained polished and sophisticated, aligning with their growing fame. Released on December 4th in 1964, their fourth studio album, Beatles for Sale, showed a more varied side of the band. This record was influenced by folk, rock, and country. Hits like 8 Days a Week and I Feel Fine revealed their introspective side. Wearing suits and coats on the cover, this still very much encapsulates their classic style during the early years. Their matching looks made them recognizable, but their personal style started to show around this time. While their looks on the cover of 8 Days a Week were still matching, Paul and Ringo are wearing scarves, while John folded up the collar of his jacket. The Beatles for Sale marked them from always wearing the same to looks that were still matching but not as similar anymore. In summer of 1965, they released Help, which marked a significant transition. Influenced by Bob Dylan, the album featured hits like Help, Ticket to Ride, and Yesterday. During this period, John's experimentation with drugs increased, and he began an affair with Yoko Ono, whom he met in 1966. George Harrison, who had met model Patty Boyd on the set of A Hard Day's Night, started to date her, and the two eventually got married. On the cover of Help, they're all wearing blue matching outfits. Matching but not similar. The Beatles began to experiment more with casual and eclectic looks. The movie Help featured them in a more relaxed attire, including turtlenecks, blazers, and jeans. Rubber Soul was a turning point, with hits like Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown, and In My Life showcasing their growth with folk rock and psychedelic influences. As their music matured, so did their styles and their personal lives. George was exploring Eastern spirituality, which greatly influenced his contributions to the band. By Rubber Soul, they embraced a more bohemian style, reflecting the influence of 1960s counterculture. This included suede jackets, Cuban heels, and turtlenecks. As the band's music evolved to incorporate more experimental and Eastern influences, their style also shifted. They moved away from the preppy outfits that once defined them, and began wearing brighter colors and looser silhouettes. During this time, they also started to grow out their hair. Although the band did not ditch their suits yet, they added elements of their personalities to their look, including turtlenecks, velvet, corduroy, and John Lennon's iconic circular glasses. In August of 1966, Revolver, the album that's often hailed as one of their greatest achievements, was released. Tracks like Eleanor Rigby showcased their willingness to experiment with new sounds. This period also saw heightened tensions within the band. John and Yoko's relationship was deepening, and Paul's relationship with Jane Asher was becoming more public and intense. With Revolver, their fashion took a more psychedelic and avant-garde tone. They incorporated vibrant, colorful patterns and grew their hair even longer. John Lennon started to wear his signature round glasses, and the band's overall look became more eclectic and reflective of their personal experimentation with different musical styles. The band's foray into more vivid colors and relaxed shapes reflected the decade's shift towards psychedelia. Movements of free love and drug experimentation made their way into art and music, with reverberating guitars and kaleidoscope visuals replicating the effects of LSD. The Beatles' 1966 album Revolver demonstrated a heavy psychedelic influence, especially the tracks Love You Too and Tomorrow Never Knows. Thus, their outfits possessed a carefree sensibility, although they still remained a level of put-togetherness and refinement. Their next record, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, was a masterpiece that cemented their status as musical innovators. Songs like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and A Day in the Life exemplified their psychedelic influences. The sudden death of their manager Brian Epstein in August of 1967 left the band without a guide figure, adding to their internal strains. The Sgt. Pepper era marked a significant departure from their once mop-top earlier looks. The Beatles donned flamboyant military-style uniforms in bright, neon colors for the album cover, embracing the full psychedelic look of the late 1960s. This period was characterized by extravagant and artistic fashion choices, heavily influenced by the burgeoning hippie movement. The Beatles had many iconic album covers, yet none was as recognizable as Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which has been parodied numerous times. The artwork depicts the foursome standing behind a flower display, spelling The Beatles, aching a funeral arrangement. Alongside them are the faces of icons from Bob Dylan to Edgar Allan Poe. And there's even an image of the boys in their earlier days wearing matching suits placed next to them. The members wore brightly colored military outfits. Paired with their distinctive facial hair, this was quite the change from their early days. At the heart of swinging London was Chelsea's fashionable King's Road, where the coolest kids bought their clothes from the most trendy boutiques. Otherwise, they headed over to Portobello Market, finding old military jackets and reappropriating them for everyday wear. Just over 2 decades had passed since the end of World War II, and now young people were reinventing military wear, and the Beatles were no exception. Paul McCartney explained in the Beatles anthology that they had picked, in quotes, Bright psychedelic colors, a bit like the fluorescent socks you used to get in the 50s. They came in pink, very turquoise, and very yellow. The band used real war metals to accessorize. Soon enough, they resembled an eccentric psychedelic group of soldiers, marching through the end of the decade with their newfound confidence. Their unashamed experimentation with feminine colors and styles during this period, often sporting floral printed jackets, floaty neckties, and Afghan coats, demonstrated their incomparable popularity. Their success meant they could get away with any look, no matter how daring. Continuing their psychedelic phase, the Magical Mystery Tour included hits like Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane. Paul, who had broken up with Jane Asher in July of 1968, started a relationship with American photographer Linda Eastman. The band's personal dynamics were increasingly complex during this time. Their psychedelic style continued with the Magical Mystery Tour. The Beatles wore colorful, eclectic clothing, including capes, scarves, and paisley prints. Their fashion was playful and matched the surreal, experimental nature of the music and the film during this period. In February of 1968, the Beatles traveled to India. I know I talk about this a lot, but I feel like people truly don't know the significance of this trip, not only for them as a group or their career, but mostly for them individually, and how this would continue to influence all of their personal lives. The Beatles made their trip to India in 1968, led by George's devoted interest in the teaching of the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, including transcendental meditation. Although their trip was incredibly creatively fruitful, it also impacted the Beatles' style. In an archive interview from the Beatles anthology, George shared, "If you go to India, you can't wear Western clothes. That's one of the best bits about India, having these cool clothes, big baggy shirts and pajama trousers." When the band returned to England, their fashion reflected the anti-establishment values they had come to develop, standing in direct opposition to the image of corporate traditional businessmen. They wore their suits even looser than before, grew their hair even longer than before, and often sported denim as part of their smart wear. After this trip, John divorced his wife Cynthia to be with Yoko Ono, and George started getting lost in meditation, leading to tensions between Paddy and him. In November 1968, the release of the Beatles' self-titled album, but mostly referred to as the White Album, reflected their individual interests with a diverse range of styles. Songs like While My Guitar Gently Weeps and Obla Di Obla Da showcased their varied influences. The recording sessions were marked by significant tensions, with Ringo even temporarily leaving the band. George's marriage to Pattie Boyd strained due to his spiritual pursuits and her burgeoning relationship with Eric Clapton. The White Album era saw the Beatles adopting a more diverse style, an individualized approach of fashion. John Lennon often wore all white suits, reflecting the minimalist and avant-garde sensibilities. Paul McCartney leaned towards casual yet stylish attire. Ringo Starr opted for bold prints and more flamboyant outfits, while George Harrison embraced Indian clothing and accessories. Their next album, Yellow Submarine, was primarily a soundtrack album, and while it was not as groundbreaking as their other works, it was and is a notable part of their catalog. By this time, the band's personal relationships were truly increasingly strained, and each member was pursuing a solo career. The fashion for Yellow Submarine was still rooted in psychedelic fashion with bright colors and psychedelic patterns. However, this was primarily a soundtrack for an animated film. Their actual personal styles were not as prominently showcased in this movie, but generally during the time, I feel like their psychedelic styles became a little more toned down. The bright colors became a little more muted, and they saw a departure in a more grown-up style. Their next two albums weren't released in the order they were recorded in. Let It Be was recorded before Abbey Road, but Abbey Road was released prior to Let It Be. Let It Be was recorded in early 1969, during the troubled session that would eventually become the Let It Be album and film. However, due to various delays and production issues, the album was not released until May of 1970, after Abbey Road. Abbey Road, on the other hand, was recorded between February and August of 1969 and finally released on September 26th of the same year. It was the last album the Beatles recorded for their breakup. Although Let It Be was released later, Abbey Road was the last album the Beatles recorded together. Abbey Road is remembered for its polished production and iconic medley. Hits like Come Together and Something highlighted their musical synergy despite underlying conflicts. This period saw John's deepening relationship with Yoko Ono, with whom he would later marry in 1969, and Paul's marriage to Linda Eastman. By Abbey Road, the Beatles' fashion reflected a more mature and refined style. The iconic album cover shows them crossing the street, with each member's attire shown and reflecting their individuality. John in a white suit, Paul barefoot and in a suit, George in denim, and Ringo in a black suit. This era marked a blend of casual and formal elements, showing their evolution from a cohesive group style to personal expression. There are many myths and legends surrounding the Abbey Road cover, with some of them pretty much evolving solely around the fashion. So I want to break these down for you to just get into the fashion and how they became so popular that basically everything they do became overanalyzed. So on the morning of August 8th in 1969, the Beatles gathered by a zebra crossing in northwest London. They were there to take a photo which would become the cover of their upcoming album. They only had a few minutes to get a shot. Police were holding traffic up to keep the road clear, so with the photographer perched atop a stepladder in the middle of the road, the band began to cross the road back and forth. There was only time for 6 shots, with 5 of them being bad, with weary, uninterested musicians out of step with each other. One of them, though, was perfect. It was this shot that would become one of the defining images of the world's most famous band. It fronted the Beatles' Abbey Road album cover, their 11th studio album, and the last collection of songs they'd ever recorded. So far, these are the facts, but as said, there are many myths and legends about this cover, so let's get into those. The alleged story of the most popular conspiracy theory of the Beatles goes like this. In November of 1966, Paul McCartney crashed and died while driving along the M1. Not wanting to derail the success of the world's most popular band, their management had quickly sourced a look-alike to replace him and carried on as if nothing had ever happened. When Abbey Road was released in September of 1969, a group of students in the US began to pick up on cryptic clues on the album cover, which supposedly hinted at Paul's demise. The rumor spread from campus to campus, later infiltrating the mainstream media. From the off, the conspiracy theory has been debunked, with Paul himself the chief denier. "It's all bloody rubbish," he told Life magazine in an interview given later that year about the theory. He's even poked fun at it through his solo work, with a 1993 album called Paul is Life. Another one of the most enduring conspiracies is that the band are walking across the road as if they were a funeral procession. So this is the theory that is mostly about the clothes. John Lennon, leading the way and dressed in white, is supposedly the clergyman, while a black-suited Ringo Starr is meant to be the undertaker. George Harrison, meanwhile, had ditched a suit in favor of workmanlike overalls and an all-denim look, is allegedly the gravedigger of the procession. Paul McCartney, apparently the dead man walking, is out of step with the other, leading with his right foot while everyone else is putting his left foot forward. He's the only band member walking without shoes. Is that a sign he's a corpse about to be buried? At least that's how the conspiracy theory goes. However, it has been debunked and there's a very simple explanation. He turned up to the shoot wearing flip-flops, but then took them off when crossing the street because it was just such a hot day and he felt more comfortable like this. A famously left-handed bassist, Paul McCartney is in fact holding a cigarette in his right hand. And that really sparked the theory that this was a mistake made by an unaware body double. This theory actually gained a boost years and years later in 2003 when the cigarette was removed from the cover. However, it later turned out that this was just an airbrushed cover by an American company, and they didn't even have the permissions of either Paul McCartney or Apple Corps, who are legally owning this picture. Let It Be was the Beatles' finals album, capturing the band's return to a more raw and live recording style. With hit singles like Let It Be and The Long and Winding Road, as well as Get Back, it served as a somber farewell. The band's breakup was public and acrimonious, with legal disputes and personal disagreements marking the end of an era. John, married to Yoko, focused on his solo career and activism. Paul, now with Linda, began a new phase with his band Wings. George continued his solo career and spiritual journey, while Ringo pursued acting and solo music. Let It Be captured the Beatles in their final days, with a more relaxed and laid-back fashion sense. They often wore casual, everyday clothing during the recording sessions, including denim, flannel shirts, and simple sweaters. This reflected the raw and unpolished nature of the album and the tensions within the band. In their last photo shoot as a band, George Harrison and John Lennon can be seen wearing jeans and a cowboy-style hat. The others wear colorful neckties and flared trousers, highlighting a dramatic departure from their days of wearing matching tailored suits. Moreover, during their iconic rooftop sessions, George Harrison sports Converse, lurid green trousers, and a fur jacket. Ringo Starr dons a shiny red leather jacket, and John Lennon also sports a pair of casual white trainers and a fur jacket. Astonishingly, their style evolution only took 10 years. In that time, the band released some of the greatest albums ever made, yet they also changed the course of fashion history. The last picture ever taken of all four Beatles together was shot on August 22nd in 1969. Exactly 7 years after the first ever picture of the four of them together was taken on August 22nd in 1962. This is a fact that has always been chilling to me, honestly. This is such a coincidence, and it is insane to me that these two pictures exist and how they were taken. Throughout their career, the Beatles' fashion journey paralleled their musical evolution, from the uniformity of the early years to the individualized and experimental styles of their later periods. So that's it for today's video. This is a video I truly wanted to make for the longest time. I wanted to take a deep dive into the Beatles and their fashion history, but I knew it would need a lot of research. So the past couple of weeks I just sat down, researched this, and I am very happy to present it to you today. I hope you found this interesting. Leave a comment down below. I'd love to know which of these music and fashion eras was your favorite. Before I end this video, I quickly want to make a very exciting announcement. And the big secret is that I am going to start a podcast. The podcast is called Dolls, Unveiling the Legends of the 1960s and 70s. And it's going to be all about the amazing women of the decades. My friend Abigail DeVoe from Vinyl Monday, if you know her, she and we are going to dive into the histories and legacies of these amazing women, telling you about their lives, their legacies, who they mingled with, and how they impacted fashion, music, and art. There will be a new episode every other Friday, starting next Friday on May 31st, and I am just truly excited to be bringing this to you. I have been wanting to start this podcast for the longest time, and it all just kind of fell into place when I found Abby to host it with me. So I'm truly so excited and overwhelmed to be sharing this with you. The podcast will be available on all the classic streaming platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Deezer, wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also follow us on Instagram at The Dolls Pod. I would love for you to check out the first episode coming next week, Friday. I pour my heart and soul into this project, and I truly cannot wait to share it with you. There will be a vlog up soon where I'm going to go a little more into detail about how this all came to be, but I just wanted to announce it here to let you all know about this project that has been in the works for so long. So yeah, I hope you tune into the podcast, and let's get back to the video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would love you to give it a thumbs up and maybe even share it with a friend. It supports me, it supports the channel, and it would truly mean the world. I hope you have a wonderful day. Go out, enjoy the sunshine. Take yourself some time to focus on you and your mental health today, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye everybody.